A quadrilateral is a polygon with 4 sides. So put 4 sides together any way you want to do it, as long as there's no openings and the sides are straight. Use your imagination that that's straight and all that, and there's no openings here. Close that up. Then this is a quadrilateral. 4 sides. Quad means 4. You have 4 sides. Another thing about an attribute of a quadrilateral is that if you took all the angles of the quadrilateral and added them together, it would be like adding the angles of 2 triangles. So you would have 180 degrees in that triangle, 180 degrees in that one, and 180 plus 180 degrees gives you 360. Whoops. 360 degrees, and that's one of the attributes of a quadrilateral, that the 4 angles, the interior angles of a quadrilateral, always add up to 360 degrees. We'll be looking at specific types of quadrilaterals in the next slides. If you have a little brother or sister and you ask them to draw a kite, they'd probably draw something like this. And that is a kite, and what actually is the technical definition of a kite, it has to be quadrilateral. It has to have 2 pair of congruent adjacent sides, so this side and this side are the same length. And that's a pair, that's 1 pair, and you have to have 2 pairs, so these 2 would also match up. And the opposite sides, you take that side and this side, those are opposite, they cannot be congruent. So if you had something that looked more like this, where all sides were the same, that's a special kind of quadrilateral, but it's not a kite because it has 4 congruent sides. Kites have 2 pair of congruent sides that are next to each other, opposite sides not congruent. A trapezoid is a quadrilateral that has only 1 pair of parallel sides, and those parallel sides are called bases. And it's important that we stress the word only 1 pair. You cannot have 2 pair of parallel sides and have a trapezoid. That would be another type of figure. So let's just draw 2 parallel lines and then connect them with 2 lines that are not parallel, and we have a trapezoid. It fits the definition. It's a quadrilateral, has only 1 pair of parallel sides, and this is a base, and this is a base. Based on our definition of a trapezoid, we know it has 4 sides, and it has only 1 pair of parallel sides. So if we have our parallel sides like this, but then we have the non-parallel sides, exactly the same length, and I'm going to erase a little bit here probably to make it look like it's probably an isosceles trapezoid. So this, same length here and here, they are congruent, the non-parallel sides are congruent, then this would be an isosceles trapezoid. The remaining 3 quadrilaterals that we'll talk about after we talk about parallelograms are each parallelograms, and that will be rhombus, a rectangle, and a square. They're all parallelograms because they all have 2 pair of parallel sides, and in each of those 3 shapes the opposite sides and opposite angles are congruent. But it's possible to draw a parallelogram that's not a rhombus, and it's not a rectangle, and it's not a square. So I'll give you an example of that, or what would appear to be something like that. As long as this angle here and here are the same size, are congruent, these are congruent, opposite sides are congruent. And so by my symbols, when I put these 2 marks through here, that means they match up, same size. Just by my symbols we can see we have 2 pair of parallel sides, opposite sides and opposite angles are congruent, so it makes it a parallelogram. A rhombus is a parallelogram with 4 congruent sides. There are immediate tendencies to think this must be a square, and it can be a square, but it doesn't have to be a square. It's possible to draw a rhombus that would be a parallelogram with 4 congruent sides. It's not a square, and it actually has a name that you'd probably be quite familiar with. do it something like this. And if, say, that side, these sides are all the same length, and the opposite sides are parallel, as it would be with a parallelogram. Opposite angles would be congruent to each other. That's true in any parallelogram. Now, this would be a rhombus. It's sort of in lay terms, it's called a diamond. But the technical term is rhombus. That's what we want to call it in math class. A rectangle is a parallelogram with 4 right angles. So as long as you have a parallelogram and you have 4 right angles, you have a rectangle. It can look like this. As long as we have right angles. And it's entirely possible that all 4 sides are congruent. You know that it has another name, but it's also a rectangle. Typically we think of rectangles as looking like this. And that's one shape a rectangle could have, as long as it has 4 right angles and it's a parallelogram. And because it's a parallelogram, we know opposite sides are congruent. And it appears that adjacent sides in this example of a rectangle are not congruent to each other. And that's okay. And this emphasizes also that if it has 4 angles and they're all right angles, that there's 360 degrees in a rectangle, but we know from earlier that any quadrilateral has interior angles that add up to 360 degrees. The last type of quadrilateral that we're going to look at is a square, and obviously it's a parallelogram. And the specifics of a square, that it has 4 right angles and 4 congruent sides. So it could look like this. As long as all the sides are the same length and all the angles are right angles, then we know we have a square.